Hi everyone. This presentation is from Environmental Biology of the December B.Sc course, and we are going to deal with community ecology. Um, in this, as per your syllabus, under this, we are supposed to learn what is biotic community, what are the characteristics and classification of biotic community. Okay. So before we go into the definition for community and other such characteristics, we can just see the levels of organization in an ecosystem. The very basic unit uh, of uh, life in an ecosystem is organism, or what we call as a species, right? It is an organism. So it is actually the basic unit of any ecosystem. Starting from organism, when we go to the higher along the hierarchy of organization, uh, the groups of organisms inhabiting an ecosystem is belonging to the same species. Organisms belong to the same species inhabiting a particular ecosystem is what is referred as a population. Okay. Now, when populations of different species reside in a specific area, that is what is referred as a community, and it is considered to be a higher uh, level of organization to the population level, right? And in a, like different communities put together is what forms an ecosystem, right? And biome is actually the highest level of organization. So this figure it shows the hierarchy of the levels of organization as seen in a living world. Okay, so what is biotic community? Biotic community, the term was coined by Carl Mobius in 1877, 1880s, and the communities describes the interacting organisms living together in a habitat, and these organisms interacting, it belongs to different species. It is actually assemblage of different species of organisms. And according to Clark, biotic community is actually a group of mutually adjusted plants and animals inhabiting a natural area. And he even preferred to use biocoinos uh, for the uh, term instead of biotic community. According to Krebs in 1994, a community is an assemblage of the populations of living organisms in a prescribed area or habitat. So, actually, community can be defined as an assemblage of populations of living organisms inhabiting the same habitat, it's in the same area. So, a community is thus composed of different species of plants, animals, microorganisms of a given area. The plant communities and animal communities occurring together in the same place constitute what is referred as a biotic community. I hope the concept is clear to you. Okay. Now, for the definition proper, it can be biotic community is an assemblage of mutually supporting natural populations living together in the same area or habitat with mutual tolerance, beneficial interactions, and constant fixation and dissipation of energy. So it is actually a very complex definition which comprises the whole concept of biotic community. So here it is said it is not only just an assemblage of populations living in an area, but among the populations there is mutual tolerance. Then interactions are there, population interactions which we studied in the previous presentations. Such population interactions are there. Interspecific populations, actually, it is in a community, isn't it? Then constant fixation and dissipation of energy. That is, energy is fixed from during by the process of photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, and then it is transferred from one to the other along the trophic level. So all these it is coming in a biotic community. So it is a complex but very concise and includes all the complete concept of different perspectives of the community. Okay, so what are the attributes? Now, from the definition itself, we can actually list out all the attributes of a biotic community. Here you can see between the organisms there is interdependence, uh, there is interactions and interrelations, and that is what we were looking into in the previous presentations under population ecology, isn't it? Population interactions. There we could see there is cooperation, there is competition, there is what we call predation. So all these are interactions and interdependence. Then nutrient cycling, energy flow. Obviously, nutrient cycling it moves from along the in the biotic phase as well as the abiotic phase. So all these are actually coming in a community. It runs in a community. Okay, it is these are the functioning aspects of a community. Now, interaction with the physical environment. So, not only the biotic components, that is plants, animals, microbes, etc., interact, but they interact with each other, but also they interact with the abiotic environment. So, then only we can survive, one way. And secondly, during this interaction, even the physical environment is modified to suit their survival, to suit the survival of the organisms. Okay, then the last attribute, it is frequently changing nature of physical and functional properties with time and space. Obviously, I hope you remember about succession, isn't it? What happens in a succession? During a succession, one group of organisms or one group of one community survives for a particular time, and during its survival in the ecosystem, it modifies the environment to suit its survival, isn't it? But during this modifications, actually what happens is some other group of organisms or some other community uh, finds it more favorable for their growth. So the community actually replaces the first one. Such kind of a succession is there, frequently changing nature. So these interactions between the organisms, it can also um, interact with the physical environment, and these kind of interactions can actually modify or bring about change in the physical and the functional properties with time and space. So we can see what is a community here. So this is a single organism. Here it is actually crocodile. When like a number of crocodiles come together living in particular habitat, communicating with each other, interacting with each other, showing cooperation and competition among themselves to survive. Such a kind of assemblage of the same members of the same species living in a particular area in a particular time is what is referred as a population. So it is a next level. Now going to the next level, we can see this is community, where not only we can find crocodile species, but we can find various kinds of bird species, insect species, or sorry, arthropod species. There are different kinds of plants. For example, mangroves are there, then grasses are there, certain other flowering plants are there. So all these are belonging to different species, isn't it? So communities are actually assemblage of members of different species living in a same area. So that is what is community. And even there is another term which was proposed for a community, that was bioco-enos. I hope so far the what is community is clear to you. Okay, now uh, how two different communities differ. Okay, that is what community A versus community B refer to. Okay, so we can just cite few examples. For example, in a grassland ecosystem and a forest ecosystem, if we compare what are the differences between these two ecosystems with respect to the community structure, we can see that there is a difference in habitat, isn't it? Those the communities, the species of organisms found in the grassland is entirely different from what is found in the forest. The reason is the habitat is different. The physiological features, physical features are different. Then the animals which can adjust or adapt to the two different conditions, they are different. And species composition is different. So all these actually differentiate the two different communities. Okay, this is with respect to two different communities having the same stature. Now we are going to define what are the two different types of communities. That is major community and minor community. The major communities are of sufficiently large size, and usually they are complete in organization, and they are relatively major communities relatively are independent except for the input of solar energy. Okay, they're functionally independent from other neighboring communities except for the input of solar energy. While minor communities are more or less dependent on neighboring ones, and their circulation of energy flow is obviously independence. Energy flow is independent, but they are dependent for other sources with the neighboring communities. So we can say that the major community is, in one hand, it is complete, it is self-sustaining, it is functionally independent. Only the input, an external input is the solar energy. While minor communities are those which are smaller in size, they are not complete. They have to depend upon the neighboring communities for their existence, and they are not independent units. Obviously, they depend on neighboring communities for various sources, not only energy source. Right? Major communities examples are forest, grassland, desert, etc. While minor communities are smaller in size, small ponds, mountain streams, smaller spaces. Okay, even we can see like the smaller ponds which we keep in our gardens, that can also be a community because there are assemblage of different species living in an area, isn't it? So even that small kind of a community can also exist, and that is classified under minor community. I hope that is clear, right? So there is yet another concept which we refer as a micro communities. Actually, some minor communities, they are extremely limited in extent, and number of component species and populations are very less. Okay. So in that case, such minor communities are referred as micro communities. For example, we can say rotten logs. Okay, rotten log, if you take, um, there may be a few kind of species which are found on the rotting bark portion. There may be some other like insect assemblages deep within the rotting log. So we can see that there are different kinds of populations. They exist in the same log, but the size of the habitat is very small. So such kind of habitat is referred as a micro communities. You can see burrows in large trees that may contain a small amount of water during rainy season. That may collect a small amount of water, and that kind of a community, tree hole community actually, a tree hole ecosystem. That kind of a habitat, it actually supports a very different kind of what you call species assemblages. Even recently, there have been discovery of many dragonflies from these kinds of freehold ecosystem, and it was found that it is very unique among these ecosystems. So these such kind of communities are referred as micro communities. So we saw what are the how two different communities they differ. We saw the two different types of communities and the examples. Okay, so this is minor community and major community, which we have been discussing. A few very important points under these two types of communities. Okay, so now we can pass on to the characteristics of biotic community. A biotic community has its own characteristic features, just like as we have seen in the case of population. And when we are speaking about the biotic community, we already saw that the biotic community is composed of different populations, isn't it? Different species. So, um, but when we are speaking about the characteristics of biotic community, it is actually the characteristics of the whole community. It is not the characteristic features of the components of the community. We are not speaking about the characteristic features of each and every specific species which makes up the community. Instead, we are speaking about the whole community. So here we are going to deal with characteristics of the whole community. Okay, but that may be contributed from different species. That is a different story. Okay, the first one is species composition. So what is species composition? It is the number and different kinds of species that constitute the biotic community. Okay, and this species composition, it may vary from one community to the other, Similarly, it may vary from one season to another in the same community. Okay, species composition of community A, it will be different from the species composition in community B. Species composition in a forest ecosystem, it will be different from that we can see in the case of a grassland ecosystem. It may be different from the species composition in a desert ecosystem, from a marine ecosystem. All these ecosystems will have different species composition. At the same time, we can see that if we take a single community, for example, this one, a forest ecosystem. Okay, the species composition of a forest ecosystem during summer time, it will be different from that of the species composition during the rainy season. It will be different. So when we speak about a single community itself, we can see that the species composition vary from one season to another. Okay, so it is actually the nature of species composition that makes a community distinct from another community. Okay, now next one is species abundance and species diversity. We can look into it in together. Now, species abundance is actually species richness, and usually species richness and abundance, it is one and the same, almost synonymous. So, what is species abundance? Species abundance is actually the number of species in a community. How many number is there? Okay. With the increasing number, we can see that there can be more number of species, there can be more number of food chains, there can be a complex food web, and hence the stability of the particular community can be increased, isn't it? Right? So, with the increase in species abundance, actually what is happening? The community is becoming more and more stable. Now, species diversity, what is it? Actually, species diversity is almost similar to species abundance, but it is slightly different. The reason is species diversity, when we are speaking, it is actually diversity of diversity of species in a community. That is how many different number of species are there in a particular community. That is what is referred as the species diversity. But species diversity in a particular community is dependent on the richness as well as the evenness of the distribution. Okay, so we can see that with the species diversity tends to be low in a physically controlled ecosystems. For example, like cultural, that's one, or physically controlled in the sense, for example, maybe like desert ecosystems, something like that. Okay, it is high in biologically controlled ecosystems. For example, a forest ecosystem where it is actually the biotic cases which is more predominant. So there you can see it is high. Species diversity is high, and it is high in like marine ecosystems or coral ecosystems, etc. Okay. Now the next one is here you can see with respect to the species diversity, the higher the species diversity, you can see the more number of ecological niches are there, and higher the species diversity, you can see it is more and more stable because a higher number of food chains and food webs. So actually, more number of species existing in a particular ecosystem is very important for the survival of the community as such. Okay, now the next one is species dominance. In a community, we can see that all organisms are not equally important in determining the nature of the biotic community. Some species do have a major role in deciding what the community is or how the community is. And these species generally exert major controlling influences, usually due to their size, their number, and their functional activities. So, such species are referred as ecological dominant species. Ecologically dominant species. So, the term dominance refers to the relative control of the community by a few organisms over the energy flow. Okay, energy flow we referred it in the earlier presentations. So those species which have a dominant role, actually it decides the nature of the biotic community. Uh, we can take an example like from terrestrial communities. In terrestrial communities, the plants are more dominant than animals. And that is why when we classify the protocol ecosystem, we can say that it is a forest ecosystem, isn't it? Grassland ecosystem. Right? Actually, that particular ecosystem, what are the species composition, etc., is decided by what kind of plant communities exist over there. If it is grassland ecosystem, grassland or grasses are the most dominant groups of plant communities, isn't it? Plant species, and the animals or the microbes which survive there, it is decided by the plant communities. If it is grasses, the species composition of animals, it is one type, and if it is forest land, the animal composition, it will be different type, isn't it? So actually, this in terrestrial ecosystems, we can see that plants are more dominant than animals. But what happens in aquatic communities? In aquatic communities, animals are more important than plants. So there it is animal communities are the dominant species. Okay, the ecological dominance, it constitutes the most prominent species in the community, and they are actually more in number, possess the highest biomass, contribute largely to the energy flow, contribute to control the energy flow and nutrient cycling, and hence the whole biotic community is controlled by the ecological dominant group. Okay, for example, in a forested community, the trees are dominant, and these trees, it decreases the light intensity or light penetration, it reduces the wind velocity, it increases the relative humidity, and it provides food and shelter for other animals. So if the dominant species it is removed from a community, it results in a very drastic change in the structural makeup of the community, even the survival of the community. But the removal of less dominant species may not have much important effect, much what you call drastic effect on the community. So the ecological the species dominance differ from one community to the other, and the like the what you call dominance exerted by the ecologically dominant species, it actually have a greater role on controlling the survival of the biotic community. Okay, so I hope we have discussed about the first four characteristic features of biotic community, and the rest we will be discussing in the coming presentations. Okay, so we just started with the community ecology. We defined community what is community. We also saw the different types of communities, and we just started with the characteristics of a community. I hope it is clear to you, and the notes and the reference materials will be shared with you soon. Thank you.